the eye of the night. In a land that had never learned to hurry, where the sky hummed gently even after the sun went to sleep, there lived a very small cyclops named Lumo. He lived alone, but never felt lonely. At least not always. His home was a hollow hill covered in moss, with a round door and a chimney that puffed dreams like sleepy clouds. Birds liked to nap on his roof. Fireflies lingered outside long after the stars had arrived. And inside, Lumo spent most of his days wondering about things most creatures never thought twice about. He wondered how flowers knew when to close their petals. He wondered if the moon ever got tired of shining. He wondered why no one ever listened to the silence. And most of all, he wondered one question more than any other. Why, he often whispered to the night, lying curled in a blanket of wool and fern, do I have only one eye? The question wasn't painful. Not exactly. It was more like a quiet weight that never left his side. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. But he didn't understand. And sometimes not understanding is its own kind of ache. He had asked frogs and bees, shadows and stars, but none of them had answers. A few birds had tilted their heads at him sympathetically. The wind had rustled kindly through his fur once, but no one really knew why he was the way he was. So one evening, as the world was exhaling its last warm breath of the day, Lumo stood outside his little hill home, looked up at the sky and said quietly, I'm going to find out. He didn't pack food, he didn't say goodbye. He just took a small stone from his garden, a flat one with a heart-shaped hole in the middle, and placed it in the pocket of his vest. For luck. Then he stepped onto the soft path of twilight and began to walk. At first, everything felt familiar. The sleepy sound of river frogs, the long shadows of willow trees, the taste of damp night air that reminded him of mint and memory. But as the hills began to stretch and the sky began to deepen, he realized something was shifting. The stars seemed closer here. The trees began to glow ever so faintly, just around the edges, as if remembering their own dreams, and the path beneath his feet started to hum. Gently, like it had been waiting. He was no longer near his home. He was somewhere else, somewhere between the waking and the sleeping. And here, perhaps, the answers lived. Lumo walked on. His feet were quiet. His breath was soft. His one large eye stayed wide open, watching, not just the things outside, but the stirrings inside him too. Soon the forest thickened, but it did not grow dark. In fact, the trees ahead glowed more clearly now, not bright, but soft, like paper lanterns lit from within. Their leaves shimmered with pale green light, and their trunks gave off a gentle warmth, like stones that had soaked in sunlight all day and decided to share it. This was the glowing forest of listening, though Lumo didn't know its name yet. He only knew it felt alive, not just alive in the usual way, like growing and moving, but alive like it was breathing with him. The air felt full of quiet attention, like the whole forest was leaning in, gently. As he stepped between the trees, the hum grew clearer until it wasn't just a hum. It was a kind of music, faint, yes, but there. Not made of instruments, not even made of sound, really. It was a rhythm that pulsed through the roots, into his toes, up through his legs and into his chest. He felt calm. He felt small. And yet, not invisible. Not wrong. Just curious. The trees began to speak, though not with words. They rustled in patterns. They breathed in long, slow sentences. Their leaves shifted in whispers. And in the heart of the forest, resting against the base of a wide willow with glowing bark, was something, or someone, a creature of bark and vine. Its body was made of twisted roots and gentle moss, and its face seemed carved from ancient wood. Its eyes were hollow, but deep inside glimmered two soft lights, like lanterns floating on a midnight pond. Lumo approached slowly. The creature looked up, not suddenly, not sharply, just naturally, as if it had known he was coming all along. You walk with a question, it said, and its voice was the sound of wind between reeds. Lumo blinked. How do you know? The creature didn't answer directly. Instead, it opened one hand, if you could call it that, and a cluster of tiny lights floated upward. They drifted like spores in the dark, circling Lumo, brushing his cheeks, tickling his fur. Your question hums, it said. It sings beneath your skin. It is a lovely melody. Lonely, but brave. I want to know, Lumo said, why I have only one eye. I want to understand. The creature was silent for a long time. A leaf drifted down and landed gently on its shoulder. Then finally it said, "A question that seeks itself will always walk far. But answers are not like apples on a tree. They do not fall. They do not ripen on their own. They are grown inside you, like roots that deepen." Lumo's shoulders sagged a little. "So, you don't know?" "I know many things," the forest being said. "I know that some eyes see the surface and others see the soul. I know that one eye, if open wide enough, can see through things that two eyes miss entirely. And I know that being different is not the same as being broken." Lumo felt something warm behind his eye. Not tears, not yet, but the feeling of being seen, of being safe. "I'm afraid," he whispered. "Good," said the creature, and its smile was a curl of bark. "That means you're about to grow." And with that, it faded back into the willow. Not gone, just becoming part of the forest again. Lumo stood for a while, letting the light of the trees rest on his skin. He didn't have his answer yet, but he had something else. A first step, a soft beginning. And so he walked on, deeper into the night that waited patiently to reveal its secrets. The forest slowly thinned as Lumo continued, the glowing trees bowing ever so slightly as he passed, like they were sending him off with a gentle blessing. Soon the air changed. The silence grew heavier, but not in a frightening way. More like the kind of silence that wraps you in a heavy blanket and tells you to rest your thoughts. Ahead, in a shallow valley wrapped in fog, sat a village. Not the kind with noise or people bustling about. This village was asleep, truly deeply asleep. The houses, round and close together, breathed in slow rhythm. Their roofs rose and fell with invisible sighs. Their chimneys puffed not smoke, but mist. Their windows glowed faintly, like fireflies resting behind lace curtains. It was as if the village itself had forgotten to wake up, and was happier that way. Lumo stepped softly between the stone paths, careful not to disturb anything. He passed lanterns that flickered, even though there was no wind. He passed benches curled into tree roots, as if waiting for dreamers to return. Everywhere he looked, things whispered, "Be still, be slow, be gentle." And in the center of the village, tucked between two sleepy trees with silvery bark, stood a small shop. Its wooden sign rocked lazily above the door, painted in faded gold letters. "The Timekeeper." Lumo paused, tilting his head. He opened the door. It made no sound, not even a creak. Just a small sigh, like the shop itself was relieved to be visited again. Inside, time moved differently. Hundreds of clocks ticked in different rhythms. Some fast, some slow, some barely moving at all. Hourglasses turned themselves lazily, sand falling like snow. There were drawers labeled with dates that hadn't happened yet, and others with days no one remembered. Behind the counter sat a man so old he looked like he had been carved from dust and candlelight. His beard draped like cobwebs over his lap. His hands were folded neatly, and his eyes were closed. But as soon as Lumo stepped inside, the man smiled. "I've been expecting you," he said, voice as soft as worn paper. "You have?" Lumo asked. "Not today, not exactly, but in one of the yesterdays that still hasn't arrived." Lumo blinked. "I'm looking for an answer," he said. "I want to know why I have only one eye." The timekeeper opened one eye slowly. It sparkled like a clock face under moonlight. "Ah, a question of shape and soul." He stood, slowly, carefully, like lifting a very old book from a shelf, and walked over to a cabinet lined with tiny glass jars. Each jar held a shimmer, a flicker, a something. "This," he said, pulling one down and holding it toward Lumo, "is one of your moments." Inside the jar danced a tiny light, not bright, not loud, just quiet and steady, like a heartbeat made of memory. Lumo stared. "I don't remember that," he said. "No," the timekeeper said, "but it remembers you." Lumo watched the light flicker. Inside it, he saw himself, much smaller, even younger, kneeling beside a river, watching how the light hit the water. He wasn't doing anything important. just noticing, just being. You saw something no one else saw that day, the old man said. You saw it not with your eye, but with your attention. And that, little one, is rarer than gold. Lumo felt something shift in his chest, a warm ache, a quiet pride. But I still don't understand why I'm made this way, he said. Why just one eye? The timekeeper smiled. Not all questions end in answers. Some end in understanding, and some in acceptance. Lumo looked down at the jar in his hands. It was warm. Take your time, the old man said. Time likes to be taken slowly. Lumo stepped outside, the jar tucked gently against his chest. The village around him breathed on, peaceful, still dreaming. He knew the answer was still far away, but somehow he didn't feel lost anymore. Just in motion. He looked up at the sky where the stars had rearranged themselves into a soft spiral. And he began to walk again, toward the hills beyond, where something old and massive waited to meet him. The stars above moved slowly now, so slowly they felt more like drifting thoughts than distant suns. Lumo followed a path that was barely there, just a faint trail of softened earth and moonlight. The air changed again. It became stiller, thicker, as if the world had forgotten to exhale. Each step felt like moving through memory, like every blade of grass beneath his feet remembered who had walked here before. And then, rising ahead of him like a sleeping god, was a giant. He sat in the center of the plain, folded gently, arms resting on knees, head bowed as though listening to the silence itself. He was made of stone, but not the kind that crumbles. This stone was ancient and alive, covered in soft moss, threaded with vines, dappled in lichen that glowed faintly like fading dreams. Lumo approached slowly. He didn't speak. Something about the stillness was sacred. The giant didn't move, not at first. But after a long moment, he opened one eye. Just one. Like Lumo. The eye was not glowing, not sharp, just deep. So deep, Lumo felt like he could fall into it and never reach the bottom. He swallowed and spoke, barely above a whisper. Are you awake? The giant's voice came like an earthquake beneath a lullaby. I am always listening. Lumo stood very still. I have a question, he said. I've been walking with it for a long time. The giant did not answer, not with words. Instead, he placed a hand, massive, cracked, ancient, on the ground beside Lumo. The movement stirred no dust. It did not shake the earth. It was gentle, patient. Then sit, the giant said, and let us listen together. So Lumo sat, not because he expected answers, but because something in him felt ready to listen back. They sat for a long time, maybe an hour, maybe a lifetime. No words, just breathe. Wind, the low song of the world continuing quietly around them. And in that space, something opened inside Lumo, not a thought, not a truth, just space. Space for not knowing, space for being small, space for his question to rest, for a while, without needing to be answered. Finally, the giant spoke again. You seek to know why you are made the way you are. Lumo nodded. But you cannot measure the shape of your soul with a mirror, the giant said, and not all symmetry is wisdom. The words felt like they came from deep beneath the earth, from roots older than thought. I feel like I'm missing something, Lumo admitted. The giant was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I have two eyes. I see far and wide, but I cannot see the small things that live in stillness. He turned his massive gaze to Lumo. Your eye is not one by accident. It is one by design, not to divide the world, but to see it whole. Lumo felt tears rising now, not of pain, but release. He stood and placed a hand gently on the giant's massive thumb. Thank you, he whispered. The giant bowed his head again, slowly, and returned to silence. Lumo walked on, the plains behind him fading into memory. He did not have his answer yet, not the full one. But he was beginning to understand that some questions don't end in answers. They become companions. And still the road ahead waited. Not shorter, not longer, just exactly as it needed to be. The land ahead softened again. the stones gave way to tall grass, waving slowly in the breeze like a field of green lullabies. Here, even the sky felt hushed. The stars had stopped twinkling and instead pulsed gently, like distant heartbeats. Like they, too, were listening. Lumo followed the wind. It didn't lead with force, but with invitation. Soon he saw movement in the grass. Not quick or sharp, soft and circular, as if something round and gentle was curled there, resting. As he came closer, the shape stirred. It was a creature, unlike any Lumo had ever seen. It looked like it had been spun out of mist and moonlight, with fur that shimmered between blue and gold, depending on how you looked at it. Its eyes were wide and calm, like pools that never ended. And when Lumo stepped closer, he felt something stir, not in the ground, but in himself. A warmth, a thrum, a reflection. The creature turned its gaze to him and blinked slowly. "Hello, little seeker." Lumo blinked back. "Did you know I was coming?" "Of course," the creature said. "I felt you long before you arrived." Lumo tilted his head. "How?" The creature stood, stretching with the grace of a yawn, and padded over on 4 silent legs. It stopped in front of Lumo and gently pressed its head to his chest. Lumo froze, but not out of fear. It felt like a hug from the inside. The creature stepped back. "I have 2 hearts," it said, "one for myself, and one for the world." Lumo stared. "2 hearts?" "Yes, one beats with what I know, the other beats with what you feel." Lumo's throat tightened. "That sounds heavy." The creature smiled. "Only when others carry pain, but also joy, wonder, curiosity. You, little one, carry all of it. And so I feel all of it too." They sat in the grass together. The wind passed over them like a mother's breath. Lumo said nothing at first, but slowly the feelings began to surface. "Sometimes I think I'm broken," he whispered, "because I see differently, because I don't match." The creature's fur shimmered like dusk on water. "You are not broken. You are a singular window into things others overlook. You see not with distance, but with depth, with softness." Lumo looked down at his hands. "But it still hurts sometimes, to feel like I don't belong." The creature touched his paw to Lumo's shoulder. "Then let it hurt. Let it be soft. Let it move through you. Pain does not mean you are wrong. It only means you are open." They sat for a while, not as question and answer, but as beings with hearts in their hands. Lumo felt his own heart beat, and he imagined a second, hidden beside it, beating for those around him. He thought about the trees, the timekeeper, the giant, and now this creature who felt what others forgot to notice. "I think I understand," Lumo said at last. "Not all of it, but enough." The creature nodded. "Good. There is one more place left." Lumo stood slowly. "Where?" The creature turned its head toward the mountains in the farthest distance. "Where wishes become light, and light becomes truth." Lumo looked up at the stars once more. They seemed closer again, and so with a slow breath he began to walk. His step was still small, but it was steady now. The path to the mountain was different from all others, not because it was harder or longer, but because the air itself felt sacred. It shimmered, not like heat, not like magic, like memory. Lumo walked in silence. The grass faded into soft stone beneath his feet. The world behind him grew smaller, not distant, but still, like a page he had finished reading but carried in his heart. Ahead, the mountain rose in wide, graceful curves, no cliffs, no sharp edges. It looked like it had been shaped by breath, not by time. Its slopes glowed with moving lights, not torches, not stars, but something alive. They drifted in the air like snowflakes, glowing gold and violet and silver. They didn't fall. They floated. Each one seemed to carry a feeling, a thought, a piece of someone who had once come here. Lumo paused and reached out. One of the lights brushed his fingertips. It was warm. A memory spilled gently into him, not his own, but full of love. A tiny fox burying a flower beside a fallen tree. A whispered goodbye. A promise kept. The light drifted on. Lumo looked up the slope. There were thousands of them, Each one carried something, a grief, a hope, a moment someone couldn't carry anymore, or didn't want to forget. The mountain was alive with them, and it welcomed him. He climbed slowly. The lights didn't guide him. They noticed him. They floated nearby, curious and calm, reflecting his heart back to him in gentle pieces. Some showed him versions of himself, Lumo stopping to rescue a caterpillar from a puddle, Lumo crying when no one saw, Lumo laughing when he thought he was alone, Lumo watching a single cloud drift by for almost an hour just because it was beautiful. He had forgotten all those things, but the mountain had not. This was not a place of judgment. It was a place of remembering. When he reached the summit, there was no grand altar, no throne, no voice from the sky. Just wind and light, and the soft sound of everything he had ever been, drifting in the quiet. Lumo sat down. He placed his hand on the stone beneath him. "I'm still not sure what the answer is," he said aloud, to no one, or maybe to everything. And then he heard it, not in his ears, in his chest. A voice not separate from his own, but inside it. "You were never meant to have two eyes, because one was enough to see what others don't. One was enough to find beauty in silence. One was enough to hold space for sorrow. One was enough to see the soul instead of the surface." Lumo's eye welled with tears. He wasn't broken. He wasn't missing something. He was simply different. And different in this wide and glowing world was a kind of treasure. The lights around him pulsed gently, not in celebration, not in triumph, but in recognition. He sat there until the stars began to fade into the pale blush of dawn. Then he stood quietly, and he turned toward home. The answer now lived inside him, not sharp, not loud, but steady and soft, like light. Lumo walked slowly, not because he was tired, though he was, but because everything around him felt more alive than ever before. The path home wasn't the same one he had taken outward. It bent gently through new meadows, across old streams, under skies that had changed their tone. But somehow, it all felt familiar. Like the world had rearranged itself just enough to say, "You've changed, so we'll meet you where you are now." Birds stirred in the branches, still half asleep. A fox watched from the shadow of a stone and then closed its eyes again. Everything seemed to recognize him, not because he looked different, but because he carried something different now. Not answers, not wisdom, but peace. It was late morning when he saw the little hill again, his home nestled quietly among the grass and ferns. The chimney gave off a sleepy puff. The round door looked exactly the same. He smiled. He stepped inside. The air smelled of quiet and moss and the softest memory of tea. His blanket lay folded. His cup waited by the fire. Even the heart-shaped stone from his garden was still in his pocket. He sat. He didn't speak. There was no need. Outside, the day moved gently through its rhythm. Sunlight played on the floor. Wind nudged the curtains like a friend checking in. And inside, Lumo closed his eye, not to block the world out, but to let it settle softly inside him. He did not dream. He simply rested, whole, exactly as he was, exactly as he'd always been.